On December 6, 2014, 19-year-old Jessica Chambers met her abrupt and tragic end in Cortland, Mississippi. First responders found her walking near her burning car with over 90% of her body covered in burns. Despite her critical injuries, she reportedly uttered the name Eric or Derek when asked who had harmed her. Jessica succumbed to her injuries hours later, leaving behind a grieving family and community and a perplexing mystery. The investigation initially focused on identifying Eric or Derek, but no substantial leads emerged and her case went cold. In 2016, attention turned to Quentin Tellis, a 27-year-old man from the same neighborhood who had known Jessica. Authorities alleged that Tellis had been with Jessica on the day of her death, and that cell phone records placed him near the crime scene. He was indicted on capital slaying charges in February 2016. Tellis's first trial in October 2017 ended in a mistrial after the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. A second trial in September 2018 also concluded with a hung jury, leading to another mistrial. The defense emphasized the discrepancy between Jessica's reported identification of her attacker and Tellis's name, while the prosecution highlighted circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime. Let's take a moment to look at the circumstantial evidence that the prosecution brought forth. One of the key pieces of evidence was cell phone data. Investigators analyzed records from both Jessica's and Tellis's phones, which showed that the two devices were in close proximity to each other on the day of the slaying. The records suggested that they had been together in various locations, including near Tellis's home and later near the area where Jessica's car was found ablaze. The prosecution pointed out a gap in Tellis's phone activity during the likely time of the crime. They argued this could mean Tellis deliberately turned his phone off to avoid detection, but the defense countered that there was no direct proof of this intention. Another piece of circumstantial evidence involved a gasoline purchase. Surveillance footage captured Tellis at a gas station buying a prepaid debit card around the time of Jessica's elimination. Prosecutors speculated that he might have also purchased gasoline to ignite her car. That said, they were unable to find any footage of him making a purchase like this. Just the prepaid debit card purchase that happened to go down at a gas station. The defense argued that this was entirely immaterial to the case at hand. DNA evidence also played a role in the case. Tellis's DNA was found on Jessica's car keys, which were recovered at the crime scene. The prosecution highlighted this as evidence of Tellis's involvement, but the defense argued it was not unusual for his DNA to be on the keys, given that he and Jessica were acquaintances. The mere presence of his DNA, they contended, was insufficient to prove any criminal act, especially since it could not be definitively dated to the time of the slaying. Witness testimony further complicated the case. Some witnesses claimed they saw a man resembling Tellis with Jessica on the day she died. Others described Tellis's behavior in the days following the slaying as suspicious or evasive. While these accounts suggested possible involvement, they were not definitive and left room for interpretation. A critical and controversial aspect of the case was Jessica's own statements. When first responders found her severely burned, she reportedly said that Eric or Derek was responsible for the attack. This led investigators to initially focus on suspects with those names, but no viable leads emerged. The prosecution later argued that Jessica's severe injuries might have impaired her ability to speak clearly, suggesting she could have been trying to say a name similar to Tellis. The defense, however, emphasized that Jessica's words didn't match Tellis's name, raising reasonable doubt about his guilt. In addition to the charges in Mississippi, Tellis faced further severe legal issues in Louisiana. He was accused in the 2015 stabbing-slaying of Ming-Chen Xiao, a Taiwanese graduate student studying in America. According to Tellis, he would buy prescription medications off her for the purposes of resale, However, he denied any role in her demise. In November 2022, a judge dismissed the elimination charge with respect to Ming Chen without prejudice, citing procedural delays and the need for Tellis to serve his Mississippi sentence first. A without prejudice dismissal means that the prosecution has the ability to bring the case once again. As of now, Quentin Tellis remains incarcerated in Mississippi, serving a 5-year sentence for an unrelated burglary conviction. His tentative release date from his present incarceration is October 2027. The slaying charges in both Mississippi and Louisiana remain unresolved, leaving the families of Jessica Chambers and Ming-Chen Xiao without closure. Devin Williams, a 29-year-old truck driver from Emporia, Kansas, vanished under mysterious circumstances over Memorial Day weekend in 1995. Devin was a dedicated husband and father of 3. He and his wife, Mary Lou, had recently purchased a new home, marking a joyful milestone in their lives. As an experienced truck driver, Devin was familiar with long hauls and the demands of the road. On May 23, 1995, he departed Kansas for a routine delivery to California, a route he had traveled numerous times without incident. After successfully delivering his cargo in California, Devin began his return journey to Kansas. On the evening of May 27th, he contacted his employer, expressing difficulty sleeping, but remained resolute in continuing his trip. This was the last confirmed communication from him. The following day, campers in Arizona's Tonto National Forest reported a startling sight. There was a massive semi-truck navigating the narrow forest roads, which is of course an extremely unusual and alarming occurrence. Witnesses described the driver as expressionless, making no attempt to communicate or seek assistance. Later, the truck was found abandoned in a meadow, its cargo of lettuce and strawberries intact, refrigeration unit running, and the cab locked. Devin himself was nowhere to be found. Several individuals reported interactions with a man believed to be Devin during this period. One camper recalled a disoriented individual mumbling about going to jail, while another encounter involved a man attempting to light a grill with a $20 bill, exhibiting signs of confusion and incoherence. Authorities launched extensive search operations, including foot patrols and canine units, scouring the area for any trace of Devin. Despite their efforts, no immediate evidence was found. It wasn't until nearly 2 years later, in May 1997, that hikers discovered a human skull approximately half a mile from the location of the abandoned truck. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Devin Williams. The cause of death remains undetermined, and the rest of his body was never recovered. Several theories have emerged attempting to explain Devin's bizarre behavior and subsequent passing. Some suggest Devin may have experienced a medical crisis, such as a diabetic episode or a stroke, leading to disorientation and irrational actions. Others speculate that certain substances could have induced his erratic behavior. However, Devin had no known history of substance abuse, and his employer confirmed he had consistently passed all required tests. That said, he did report difficulty sleeping, and long-haul truck drivers have been known to use pick-me-ups to meet extremely stringent deadlines. This brings me to the next theory that's often brought up. Some have suggested the possibility of a sudden mental health crisis, though Devin had no prior indications of psychological issues. That said, some theorize that the use of substances could have triggered an episode wherein he became disconnected from reality. Under this theory, he engaged in unusual behavior, including going into the woods alone, where he subsequently met his end due to exposure to the elements. Of course, there's also some who believe Devin may have encountered foul play while in his disoriented state. That said, there's a complete lack of concrete evidence supporting this theory. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Hope you're enjoying the latest entry in this series. If you enjoy my content, I've got a small favor to ask you. Hit the share button and send this video to two of your friends. Now let's get back to business. On July 13th, 1959, in Blenheim, New Zealand, a farmer named Eileen Moreland experienced an encounter that would become one of the country's most intriguing UFO sightings. Early that morning, around 5:30 a.m., Moreland set out to bring in her cows for milking. The weather was cold and still, with a thick cloud layer overhead. As she walked, she noticed an unusual green glow emanating from the clouds above, bathing the area in an eerie light. Looking up, Moreland saw two large green lights descending rapidly toward her, accompanied by a band of orange lights. Frightened, she sought refuge among a nearby set of pine trees. From her hiding place, she observed a sharply outlined saucer-shaped object approximately 20 to 30 feet wide, hovering about 15 feet above the ground. The object featured two extremely bright sources of green light on its underside, illuminating an area of about 50 yards. Two rows of small orange jets around the center emitted orange-colored flames and appeared to revolve in opposite directions. The craft was topped by a transparent dome filled with a flickering white light, inside which Moreland could see two figures wearing shiny, close-fitting suits resembling aluminum foil. The occupants wore opaque helmets that rose straight from their shoulders, and one of them stood up, extending his hands as if leaning over to look downward. After a minute or two, the jet started again, and the craft tilted slightly before shooting up vertically at great speed, disappearing into the clouds with a soft, high-pitched sound. A peculiar smell, somewhat similar to pepper, lingered in the air as the object departed. Moreland, though thoroughly shaken, was not stirred, and proceeded with her milking duties, and later reported the incident to the police. And yes, you heard that correctly. Eileen is a woman who completes a task when she sets her mind to it. She got out of bed and told herself, "I'm gonna go milk some cows." And she wasn't gonna let a little thing like a likely alien encounter get in the way of milking. The encounter attracted significant attention from both the public and authorities. The Royal New Zealand Air Force took Moreland's claims seriously, appointing Flight Lieutenant Charles Milford Jennings to investigate. Jennings found Moreland to be a rational and stable person, and local police corroborated her credibility. Additionally, a local farmer named Roy Holdaway, living about 7 kilometers from Moreland's house, reported seeing a bright light in the sky about 30 minutes before Moreland. Despite the thorough investigation, no definitive explanation for the sighting was found. The media and public attention surrounding the encounter were overwhelming, leading Moreland to move away from her home and change her name to avoid the spotlight. Berserkers were among the most fearsome figures of the Viking Age, occupying a unique place in Norse history. Though berserkers are widely known, their connection to the magic rituals and the occult is less widely discussed. The word berserker is derived from an Old Norse term, which translates to bear shirt in English. This term reflects their close association with bear shamanism, as well as their practice of wearing animal pelts, generally those of bears, into battle. These warriors were famed for their ability to enter a trance-like state of unbridled rage, known as Berserker Gang, during combat. The Berserker Gang was characterized by a number of distinct traits: immense physical strength, a seeming immunity to pain, and an overwhelming aggression that struck terror into their enemies. In this state, berserkers were described as impervious to fire and iron, though these claims are often regarded as hyperbole or myth. Some historians suggest their trance-like fury may have been induced by consuming psychoactive substances such as mushrooms. This theory is contentious, but it aligns with shamanic practices found in various cultures, which often include altered states of consciousness to connect with the spiritual or animalistic world. Bear shamanism played a central role in the berserker's identity. In Norse mythology, the bear symbolized immense power, ferocity, and resilience, qualities berserkers sought to emulate. By wearing bear skins and adopting bear-like behaviors, these warriors aimed to embody the spirit of the bear, merging human and animal characteristics. The process of transformation into a berserker likely involved elaborate rituals. These may have included chanting, rhythmic dancing, and fasting to prepare the warrior mentally and physically for the berserker gang. Some historical accounts describe berserkers as biting their shields or howling like animals before combat, further emphasizing their departure from human norms and alignment with animalistic fury. Lynn Ellen Amos, a 38-year-old financial analyst, was slain in her townhouse in Washington, D.C. on December 11, 1995. Originally from Alabama, Lynn Amos held an MBA from the University of Texas. She had a successful career in finance, including positions at Bankers Trust and Booz Allen Hamilton in New York City. In August 1995, she relocated to Washington, D.C. to join the Barron's Group as a financial consultant. Her role involved frequent trips to Mexico, where she assessed the lending practices of large banks. In the early hours of December 11, 1995, firefighters responded to a blaze at Lynn's residence. They found her unconscious on her burning bed, suffering from third-degree burns over 80% of her body. Despite being rushed to the hospital, she succumbed to her injuries 10 days later, on December 21st. Initially, authorities considered her death a tragic accident. A cigarette butt was found near her bed, and her blood alcohol level was found to be elevated well beyond the legal limit for driving. These factors led to the theory that she had accidentally set herself on fire while smoking in bed. But let's just say there was about to be what I can only term a massive crack in this investigative theory. Friends and family disputed this narrative, citing the fact that Lynn wasn't a smoker and never had been. Their concerns prompted a more thorough investigation, which revealed traces of accelerants, kerosene, gasoline, and turpentine on her mattress, floor, and pillow. This evidence indicated that the fire was deliberately set, leading authorities to classify her death as a slaying rather than an accident. Also, I just need to take a quick moment to point out what may be the obvious here. Had Lynn been a smoker, it seems like there's a pretty good chance that the authorities would have stuck with their initial ruling and never found the numerous accelerants at the scene. If that's not shoddy police work, I don't know what is. But anyway, I digress. The investigation faced significant obstacles right from the beginning. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Lynn either knew her assailant or the perpetrator had access to her home. Additionally, the crime scene was not immediately treated as such, possibly leading to the loss of crucial evidence. Despite these challenges, authorities continued to explore leads, including the possibility of a professional job. Personally, I can't help but seeing the fact that Lynn's home wasn't treated as a potential crime scene immediately as likely meaning there'll never be justice. This is doubly true if she was eliminated by a professional who may have left only the slightest clues to begin with. Speculation arose that Lynn's death was connected to her professional activities. She had confided in friends about uncovering questionable lending practices during her investigations in Mexico, describing her forthcoming report as, quote, ugly. Some friends believed she might have stumbled upon fraudulent loans or dealings involving cartel money, potentially making her a target for those involved. Others have speculated that she could have uncovered connections between the Mexican banks she was investigating and corruption in the United States. That said, at the end of the day, everything with Lynn's case unfortunately continues to remain entirely speculative. The Maradic language was once spoken in the ancient kingdom of Meroe, located in what is now Sudan, between roughly 300 BC and 400 AD. It's believed that Merotic belongs to the Nilo-Saharan family, which includes various languages spoken across Central and Eastern Africa. However, confirming that classification has proven tricky, mainly because scholars can't fully translate the current body of Merotic texts. Francis Griffith made significant strides in deciphering the script in 1909. He identified certain phonetic values, but his work hasn't yielded a complete understanding of the vocabulary and grammar. Merotic scripts exist in two main forms, hieroglyphic and cursive, both of which share some visual similarities with Egyptian hieroglyphs. Yet, aside from superficial resemblance, they function differently, with unique symbols representing distinct phonetic values. Our knowledge of Merotic is based on the roughly 1,300 inscriptions we've uncovered so far, many of which are short funerary texts or royal inscriptions. These inscriptions have been found on temples, stelae, and even personal items like jewelry. Though the texts are an invaluable resource, scholars struggle because of the limited variety of subject matter and the relative lack of extensive bilingual texts. Unlike the famous Rosetta Stone, which helped decode Egyptian hieroglyphs by providing the same passage in multiple languages, there isn't a Merotic equivalent. There are a few inscriptions in Merotic and Greek side by side, but these typically only mention proper nouns and titles, which doesn't provide much insight into everyday vocabulary. The current status of our understanding of Merotic can be described as a partial breakthrough rather than a full decipherment. Scholars are aware of some grammatical forms and can occasionally recognize names of deities, royal figures, and place names, but we still can't translate entire texts with confidence. Scholars from around the world continue to propose theories regarding the language's grammar, syntax, and lexicon. Excavations in Sudan sometimes yield additional inscriptions or artifacts, but it's rare to find something that radically alters our interpretive framework. With the advent of computational techniques being widely applied to humanities disciplines, researchers are using methods to compare Merotic with other languages in the Nilo-Saharan family. It's hoped that these methods may help crack the code on Merotic and bring closure to this unresolved mystery. Also, if this sort of content interests you, remember to check out my history channel, Lazy Chill History, by going to my channel page and clicking the link. On August 21, 1989, 17-year-old Norman Charles Ladner Jr. left his family's country store near Picayune, Mississippi, to go hunting on their 122-acre property. This was a routine activity for this outdoors-loving high school senior, who had already developed into an accomplished woodsman. When he failed to return by his usual time of 7 o'clock, his parents, Norman Sr. and Charlotte, grew concerned. His dad initiated a search and tragically discovered Norman's lifeless body in the woods with a single shot to his head. The initial investigation by the Pearl River County Sheriff suggested the possibility of an accidental death, theorizing that Norman might have fallen from a tree, causing his weapon to discharge. However, the coroner later ruled the death a self-deletion, citing a close contact wound entering the right temple and exiting the left. This conclusion was met with skepticism by Norman's family, who asserted that he exhibited no signs of depression and was, in fact, a happy and outgoing teenager. Doubts about this ruling were further fueled by several inconsistencies. Norman's wallet, containing $140, was missing from the scene. And trust me when I say it, this is going to be by far the least suspicious thing. Additionally, he had a laceration on the crown of his head, which authorities attributed to a fall onto a jagged tree root. The Ladners contested this explanation, arguing that the location of the wound was inconsistent with such a fall. Taking matters into their own hands, Norman's parents conducted their own investigation. They meticulously sifted through the soil where their son had been found and discovered a bullet embedded 2 inches into the ground. This bullet was longer than those used in Norman's rifle, raising questions about the weapon involved. When they presented this evidence to the sheriff, he dismissed it, maintaining that Norman had been standing, which would have made it impossible for the bullet to be found beneath his head. And yeah, that's the point, Sheriff. It would have been impossible for the bullet to have been found where it was. Perhaps time to reconsider your theory of the case. The Ladners' quest for answers led to even more unsettling discoveries. Approximately 300 yards from where Norman's body was found, his father uncovered a homemade radio-like device hanging in a tree. A former DEA agent identified it as a tool used by dealers to signal aircraft for substance drops. This revelation led the family to theorize that Norman might have inadvertently stumbled upon illicit activities on their property and was slain to eliminate him as a potential witness. Their suspicions were further heightened when Charlotte was approached by an unknown man at the coroner's office. He warned her against reopening the case, ominously suggesting that pursuing the matter could endanger her other children. The official stance remained that Norman's death was a self-deletion, and the case was closed without further investigation. The family's discoveries, the mismatched bullet, the missing wallet, the potentially unexplained head injury, the signaling device, and the anonymous threat were all ignored by authorities. This lack of thorough investigation and the swift conclusion of self-deletion have led to widespread speculation about a possible cover-up. Some have theorized that local law enforcement may have been complicit in illicit activities. Others have speculated that the local authorities just didn't have the necessary competencies to investigate the case meaningfully. Anyway, I'm just going to come out and say it. The only rational explanation for this case is extremely serious corruption, and Norman Ladner definitely didn't end himself. I hope one day his family gets the justice they deserve, but given the quote-unquote investigation that took place, I have my doubts. Also, this really drives home the dangers of corruption of this nature. All it takes is one compromised individual in the police department to totally botch an investigation permanently. In the early 1930s, naturalist William Beebe embarked on pioneering deep-sea explorations off the coast of Bermuda. He descended into the ocean's depths in a spherical submersible known as the bathysphere, and became one of the first people to observe deep-sea life firsthand. On September 22, 1932, during one of these dives, Beebe reported observing a remarkable creature at a depth of 2,100 feet, which he named the giant dragonfish. Beebe described the giant dragonfish as approximately 6 feet long, with a body resembling that of a barracuda. Its most striking feature was its bioluminescence. He noted, strong lights, pale bluish, were strung down the body. Additionally, the fish possessed 2 long tentacles hanging from its body, each tipped with luminous organs, one reddish, the other blue, that twitched and jerked beneath the fish. Beebe observed that one tentacle arose from the chin area, while the other was located near the tail. At the time of Beebe's observation, the largest known dragonfish species reached lengths of up to 15 inches. In contrast, the giant dragonfish he reported was significantly larger, measuring about 6 feet in length. This disparity in size led to skepticism within the scientific community, as no physical specimens or other evidence of such a large dragonfish had been obtained. Beebe's observations were documented through detailed descriptions and illustrations by artist Elsa Bostelmann, who translated his verbal accounts into visual representations. Also, if you're one of those people who just listens to my videos, this might be one of the times you want to look at the screen. Despite the intrigue surrounding Beebe's sighting, the existence of the giant dragonfish remains unconfirmed. Modern deep-sea explorations have yet to encounter a dragonfish matching Beebe's description. The largest known species today is the obese dragonfish, which attains a maximum length of about 2 feet, significantly smaller than the 6-footer reported by BB. Several factors could account for the absence of corroborating evidence for BB's giant dragonfish. The technology of the early 20th century limited deep-sea exploration capabilities, and the bathysphere lacked photographic equipment, relying solely on human observation. Additionally, deep-sea environments are vast and largely unexplored, leaving open the possibility that such a species could exist undetected. However, without physical evidence, the scientific community remains extremely cautious about the existence of this creature. So this is one of the few cryptid-type creatures I've profiled that I believe has a significant possibility of actually being something more than an urban legend or a misidentified animal. Deep-sea environments are challenging to explore, leaving room for fairly large elusive creatures to thrive undetected. Bioluminescent adaptations, like those described by BB, are common in the abyssal ocean, supporting the plausibility of such traits in a hypothetical dragonfish. Adding to the credibility of the report, BB had no way of knowing that bioluminescence was a common undersea adaptation at the time of the sighting in 1932. Additionally, gigantism is a known phenomenon in deep-sea creatures where species grow larger due to a variety of reasons which aren't fully understood. Or hey, maybe since he was one of the first ones down there, he just flat out started making up fantastical sightings for scientific clout. And if that was his goal, here I am almost 100 years later, talking about his fish fantasy. On April 16, 2003, Air Force Colonel Philip Shue, a respected psychiatrist stationed at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, died under circumstances that continue to perplex investigators. The initial appearance of a tragic car accident quickly unraveled into a complex web of mystery, leading to debates over whether his demise was self-inflicted or not. Born on July 22, 1948 in Brookville, Ohio, Philip Shue had a distinguished military career. He joined the United States Air Force in 1970, serving as a navigator before pursuing medical training to become a psychiatrist. And just so everyone here is clear, he was a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, so he had completed medical school before specializing. And trust me, this will potentially be important later on. In 1993, he married Tracy, an Air Force nurse, and by 2003, they were planning his retirement and a move to Alabama. On the morning of April 16, 2003, Colonel Shue left his home in Bourne, Texas, around 5:30 a.m., heading to work at Lackland Air Force Base. Approximately 2.5 hours later, his vehicle was observed driving erratically on Interstate 10 before veering off the road and crashing into a grove of trees. First responders found Shue deceased in the driver's seat, but the scene presented alarming anomalies. Duct tape was found around his wrists and ankles, his nipples had been surgically removed, a deep gash extended from his chest to his navel, and the tip of his left pinky finger was missing. The bizarre nature of Shue's injuries led to multiple investigations by local and state police, as well as the Air Force. After a year-long inquiry, these agencies concluded that Shue had suffered a psychological breakdown, inflicted his injuries, and ultimately deleted himself by intentionally crashing his car. This conclusion was supported by the local medical examiner, who noted the presence of lidocaine in Shue's system, suggesting he had numbed himself to perform the surgery. However, this self-deletion ruling was met with significant skepticism by many of those closest with him. Shue's widow, Tracy, vehemently disputed the findings, asserting that her husband had no history of mental illness that would lead to such actions. She highlighted their plans for the future, including purchasing a new home, as evidence of his positive state of mind. Additionally, colleagues and friends described Shue as mild-mannered and passionate about life, which some argues further casts doubt on this theory. Several significant factors complicated the narrative surrounding his demise. Shu had previously received anonymous threatening letters, one of which warned that his ex-wife, Nancy, and her new husband were plotting to have him eliminated to collect on life insurance policies. Notably, there was no evidence provided to support these allegations, and the source of the letter was unknown. During their divorce, Nancy had obtained 2 life insurance policies on Shu totaling $1 million, which she refused to cancel despite his repeated requests. Shu had expressed concerns about these policies, fearing for his safety. He had even attempted to reach out to the life insurance company to have the policies canceled, but was advised that he couldn't do so unilaterally. Now there's a major factor to keep in mind here. Shu and Nancy had at least one child, and as such, her maintaining a life insurance policy on him wasn't necessarily unusual at all. Others have pointed to the 2.5-hour gap between Shu's departure from home and the crash. This time gap is presently unaccounted for. This has led to speculation that he may have been abducted and operated on during this period. Further, the precise and deliberate nature of his injuries, such as the surgical removal of his nipples and the clean chest incision, suggested the possibility of external infliction. However, those who support the idea that Shu committed the act himself note that he was a medical doctor, and even as a psychiatrist, he had received surgical training. Unconvinced by the official ruling, Tracy pursued legal action to have her husband's death reclassified as a non-consensual elimination. She enlisted the expertise of Dr. Cyril Wecht, a renowned forensic pathologist who's made a few appearances in this series, who conducted a second autopsy. Dr. Wecht criticized the "he did it himself" conclusion, pointing out likely insufficient levels of lidocaine to achieve the necessary anesthesia for such acts. He posited that the injuries were more consistent with an act inflicted by another party. In 2008, during a legal proceeding involving the insurance company, Texas Judge Bill Palmer ruled that Colonel Shu's death was indeed a slaying. Some sources lean on this very heavily as lending official legal approval to this idea, which isn't quite accurate, at least not in a criminal context. This case was in the context of a civil lawsuit which doesn't bind anything in a potential criminal context. It's also important to remember that a finding of self-deletion would mean the insurance company doesn't have to pay the beneficiaries of the policy. Thus, the finding against the insurer that Shu didn't delete of his own accord meant that the beneficiary, Nancy, received the stated payout. Further yet, it's important to remember that the standard of proof is much lower in a civil context than in a criminal context. In a civil case, the plaintiff only has to prove it was an elimination on a balance of probabilities. That is to say, just a hair over 50%. In a criminal case, the prosecution has to prove something much more difficult, beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite the civil ruling, local authorities in the Air Force did not amend the official cause of death, maintaining that Shu did it himself. This discrepancy led to ongoing disputes and calls for further investigation. In the end, there's been no evidence whatsoever to suggest that there was any involvement by Shu's ex-wife. Some believe that Shu himself, having undergone some sort of psychological break, set up the entire process to look as though his ex-wife was involved. Big shout out to a subscriber who goes by Darren for this excellent suggestion. If you have a suggestion for this series, make sure to drop it in the comments section below or join up on the official Discord channel. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Hope you're enjoying part 109 of this series. If you enjoy my content, I've got a small favor to ask you. Hit the share button and send this video to 2 of your friends. Now, let's get back to business. On November 6, 1976, in Rome, New York, 59-year-old businessman Stanley Edward Gryzak was tragically slain during a home invasion that remains unsolved to this day. Stanley and his wife Esther owned a gas station and liquor store adjacent to their residence. That night, two masked intruders broke into their home, assaulted the couple, and shot Stanley. Stanley and Esther had been operating their gas station and liquor store since 1957. Stanley managed the liquor store while his brothers Peter and Bernard ran the gas station. Their home, attached to these businesses, was a modest house where they lived a seemingly peaceful life. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, there were undercurrents of tension, particularly concerning Stanley's brother Peter, who owned a local bar with a questionable reputation. On that fateful evening, Esther was performing her usual routine of checking the doors and windows before bed. Suddenly, two men wearing ski masks forced their way into the house. They tied her up and began ransacking the home, searching for something unknown. Upstairs, Stanley was preparing a bath for Esther and didn't initially clue into what was going on. Hearing the commotion, he rushed downstairs and confronted the intruders. A struggle ensued, during which Stanley was eliminated. The assailants continued to search the house for over 2 hours before fleeing, taking only 2 bottles of beer. Their 6-year-old grandson, asleep in another bedroom, was thankfully left physically unharmed. The initial police investigation was marred by oversights, which I feel is a running theme in unsolved slaying cases. The official autopsy reported that Stanley had perished from a single stab wound to the heart. However, this conclusion was contradicted when Stanley's son, Martin, discovered a shell casing on the dining room floor the day after the event, an item the police had missed. This discovery prompted a second autopsy, which revealed that Stanley had been shot, not stabbed. This discrepancy raised suspicions of a possible cover-up, or, at the very least, gross negligence on the part of the initial investigators. And I just have to say here, I'm no medical expert, but shouldn't these wounds look different enough that an actual medical expert can tell the difference? Seriously, if you have this expertise, let me know in the comments. In 1989, a new lead emerged when an informant, who was an admitted substance dealer and general small-time criminal, came forward. He claimed that a few days before the slaying, he had been approached by a man associated with a local bar who asked him to burglarize the Grizek home. According to the street pharmacist, the man believed there was an extremely large sum of money hidden there. This information led investigators to re-examine the case, uncovering witnesses who had seen suspicious individuals near the Grizek residence around the time of the event. Composite sketches were put together, which I've put up on your screen, but I've got to question the accuracy of them given they were made 13 years after fleeting sightings. Notably, a neighbor, Amy Scott, reported seeing a man walking toward the Grizek home on the night of the slaying, and later observed him leaving in a white Lincoln Continental. Additionally, bookstore owner Patsy Peck recalled 2 men matching the suspect's descriptions visiting her store the day before the event. Further investigation revealed that the bar where the informant worked had its liquor license revoked in 1982 due to on-site gambling and illegal selling of controlled substances. This bar was previously owned by Stanley's brother, Peter. Stanley's family speculated that his slaying might have been connected to illegal activities at the bar. However, despite these leads, the case still remains unresolved with no publicly known suspects or persons of interest. Nordic aliens are a prominent feature in UFO lore and extraterrestrial encounter narratives. Described as tall, fair-skinned beings with blonde hair and blue eyes, they closely resemble the stereotypical image of Scandinavian individuals, which is why they're dubbed Nordic. These entities are typically portrayed as benevolent, spiritually advanced, and deeply concerned about humanity's welfare and the Earth's ecological balance. Nordic aliens are commonly depicted as standing between 6 to 7 feet tall, with long blonde or reddish hair, blue or green eyes, and fair skin. Some accounts suggest they possess larger than average foreheads and are predominantly male. Their attire is often described as tailored clothing, which adds to their ethereal and graceful presence. Basically, imagine elves from The Lord of the Rings, and you've got yourself a Nordic alien. Their human-like appearance is said to allow them to blend seamlessly into human society when they choose to visit Earth. Believers often associate Nordic aliens with the Pleiades star cluster, a group of stars located about 400 light-years from Earth. This association has led to the alternative name Pleiadians. Some narratives also link them to Venus, referring to them as Venusians. These origin stories suggest that Nordics come from advanced civilizations with a deep interest in guiding and observing humanity. Nordic aliens are often described as communicating telepathically, conveying messages of peace, love, and spiritual growth. They're perceived as protectors or guardians, aiming to assist humanity in overcoming its challenges. Many contactees report receiving channeled messages from Nordics, emphasizing ecological responsibility and the dangers of nuclear weapons and pollution. The 1950s saw a surge in reports from individuals claiming to have encountered Nordic aliens. One of the most notable figures is George Adamski, a Polish-American author who claimed to have met with Nordic aliens and even taken flights with them to other planets. In his books, Adamski detailed his alleged experiences and the messages he received from these beings. Another prominent account is that of Travis Walton, an American forestry worker who claimed to have been abducted by a UFO in 1975. Walton reported encountering humanoid beings with Nordic features aboard the spacecraft. His experiences were later documented in his book, which inspired the Hollywood film Fire in the Sky. I've never seen it, but it's got pretty decent audience reviews, and I always like a good alien flick, so I may check it out. The imagery of Nordic aliens has permeated various aspects of popular culture, influencing literature, films, and the broader UFO subculture. Their human-like appearance and benevolent demeanor contrast sharply with the more commonly depicted gray aliens, who are often portrayed as emotionless or malevolent. Notably, some tellings of the Nordic alien narrative portray them as living amongst us, but in a benevolent capacity, unlike those sinister reptile people you're always hearing about. The Alula whale, sometimes referred to as the Alula dolphin, is a cryptid reported primarily in the Indian Ocean. First described by Captain Bruins in his 1971 Field Guide of Whales and Dolphins, this elusive creature has intrigued marine enthusiasts and cryptozoologists alike. According to Bruins, the Alula whale bears a resemblance to the well-known orca, but with notable differences. It's described as having a brown coloration and adorned with white star-like scars across its body. Its forehead is rounded, akin to that of a pilot whale, though not as pronounced, and it possesses a small snout. The dorsal fin is notably prominent, rising approximately 2 feet above the body. These whales are estimated to reach lengths of about 20 feet according to Bruins. Bruins reported observing these whales in pods ranging from 4 to 8 individuals, with 6 being the average group size. Sightings were primarily in the deep coastal waters of the eastern Gulf of Aden during the summer months. In addition to the Bruins accounts, there have been other reported sightings. In 1987, a naval crewman observed a dark brown whale with a prominent dorsal fin in the Indian Ocean during a passage from Fremantle to Suez. The whale was seen swimming just below the surface, approximately 100 meters ahead of the ship. As the vessel approached, the creature dove deep and disappeared. While a positive identification was not possible, The prominent dorsal fin and dark brown coloring led to speculation that it might have been an Alula whale. Despite these intriguing reports, the scientific community remains extremely skeptical about the existence of the Alula whale as a distinct species. Some experts suggest that the sightings could be attributed to color variations or mutations within known species, such as the orca. The lack of physical evidence, such as specimens or clear photographs, makes it challenging to confirm the Alula whale's existence. Okay, so anyone who's watched my content for a while now knows I love whale and dolphin cryptids, and I want to believe in them all, but I've got some problems with this one. A few rumored glimpses in the Indian Ocean don't amount to proof, especially without a single decent photograph or physical specimen. If there were truly a distinct Alula whale, and if it truly did live in pods like orcas, and given that it lives in a highly trafficked part of the ocean, we would have had confirmation by now. Or maybe not, and I just need to keep more of an open mind about large oceanic cryptids. Tammy Lynn Leppert was a promising young actress and model, best known for a small but very memorable role in one of the most iconic scenes in Scarface. Born on February 5, 1965 in Rockledge, Florida, Tammy began her journey into the limelight at the age of 4, participating in beauty pageants. As she transitioned into her teenage years, Tammy expanded her horizons into modeling and acting. She graced the cover of CoverGirl magazine in October 1978 and landed minor roles in films such as Little Darlings in 1980 and Spring Break in 1983. Her most notable appearance was in the 1983 classic Scarface, where she played the girl who distracts the lookout during the infamous chainsaw scene. However, in early 1983, those close to Tammy noticed a stark change in her behavior. After attending a weekend party following the Spring Break shoot, she returned home noticeably different. Her close friend, Wing Flanagan, observed that she came back a different person. This shift became more evident during the filming of Scarface, where she abruptly left after the 4th day. Her mother, Linda Curtis, believed Tammy was overtaken by a delusion that someone intended to harm her. Concerned, Linda had Tammy undergo a 72-hour observation at a medical center, but doctors reportedly found no signs of any mental health concerns or of substance use. On July 6, 1983, Tammy left her home in Rockledge, Florida, with a male friend, informing her mother that she was heading to the beach and would return shortly. Her friend later told authorities that they had an argument while driving, leading him to leave her in a parking lot near the Glass Bank in Cocoa Beach. Despite being the last known person to see her, he wasn't considered a suspect, though Tammy's mother maintained that he ought to have been. In the aftermath of her disappearance, investigators explored various leads. One theory involved Christopher Wilder, an Australian-born serial perpetrator linked to the slayings of several women across the United States. Wilder's modus operandi included luring women with promises of modeling opportunities, which aligned with Tammy's background. Tammy's family even filed a lawsuit against Wilder, but it was eventually dropped due to doubts about his involvement. Moreover, Wilder's known spree began a year after Tammy vanished, making his connection to her case tenuous. Another potential suspect was John Brennan Crutchley, infamously known as the Vampire. Crutchley was convicted of kidnapping a woman in Orlando, Florida, during which he drained and consumed her life essence. While he was considered a possible suspect in Tammy's case, authorities found no concrete evidence linking him to her disappearance. Crutchley had the good sense to take out the trash while serving life in prison in 2002. Linda Curtis had her own theory, believing that Tammy was abducted and slain due to her knowledge of a large-scale criminal operation in Brevard County, Florida. According to Linda, this operation involved many prominent local citizens, and Tammy's paranoia stemmed from her awareness of these illicit activities. However, investigators found no records to support this claim and didn't endorse this theory. Others have speculated that Tammy witnessed something horrific at a Hollywood party, which caused her to have a mental break. Under this theory, this mental break and her subsequent behavior made her a liability to powerful people, and they had her eliminated. In 1985, 2 years after Tammy's disappearance, Cocoa Beach detective Harold Lewis received 2 anonymous phone calls from a woman claiming that Tammy was alive. The caller also mentioned that Tammy was pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse. Despite these calls, no further evidence surfaced to confirm Tammy's whereabouts, and there's nothing to indicate that these calls were based in reality. Personally, I don't put too much stock in this call because there's always been deranged people out there who like to try to insert themselves into high-profile cases. The slaying of Trudy Espes in August 1996 remains one of Norway's most haunting unsolved crimes. Also, apologies in advance to any of my Norwegian listeners because, yes, I'm going to absolutely mess up some pronunciations here. Trudy was only 20 years old when she met her tragic fate in Geiranger, a picturesque fjord village known for its serene landscapes. Trudy grew up in Orskog, Norway, and was known as a kind, introspective young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She had been working a seasonal position at the Hotel Union in Geiranger, a village that attracts tourists from all over the world due to its UNESCO-listed fjord and stunning scenery. Like many young adults seeking adventure and independence, Trudy looked forward to this job as an opportunity to experience life in a new place. Despite her excitement about her summer role, Trudy had expressed concerns about her safety. In her personal diary, she reportedly detailed encounters with men whose behavior made her uncomfortable. These revelations, discovered after her death, would later shape parts of the investigation. On August 8, 1996, Trudy was seen sitting on a rock near a popular walking path overlooking the fjord. This location was easily accessible, frequently visited by tourists, and seemingly safe. She was engrossed in a book, enjoying the warm summer afternoon. Witnesses recalled seeing her between 4:30 and 5 p.m., relaxed and unbothered. However, by 6 p.m., just over an hour later, things had clearly changed. A Swedish couple who had passed by earlier returned to the same area and noticed Trudy was no longer there. The husband claimed to have briefly explored the wooded area and heard a single scream. Though unsettling, he dismissed it at the time, believing it could have been children playing. He also reported seeing a peculiar man, described as having a quote-unquote childlike stature. This sighting became one of the few concrete leads in the case. When Trudy didn't return to her accommodation that evening, concern grew quickly. Friends and colleagues reported her missing, and the police launched an extremely extensive search. 11 days after she disappeared, on August 19th, Trudy's body was discovered in a wooded area not far from where she had been last seen. Her remains were found concealed under heavy rocks and thick vegetation. This grim discovery confirmed the worst fears of her family and the local community. Trudy had been slain. An autopsy revealed that she had been violated before she had been slain, with the perpetrator having left behind evidence that may be used to capture him at some point. This tragic revelation turned the investigation into a high-stakes hunt for a perpetrator who seemed to have vanished without a trace. The slaying prompted one of the largest police investigations in Norwegian history. Authorities worked tirelessly to document every person present in Geiranger on the day of her disappearance. This was no easy task, as the area was a hub for international tourists. Hotel guest lists, campsite registrations, and ferry passenger manifests were scrutinized. Credit card transactions and vehicle registrations were also examined in an attempt to identify potential suspects. Over 3,000 individuals from nearly 40 countries were interviewed. Witness testimonies painted a fragmented picture of the events leading up to Trudy's disappearance. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a suspicious man loitering near the path where Trudy had been reading. He was described as being of average height, with a slim build, and speaking German. His clothing, a blue and white striped shirt, was noted by several witnesses. It's unclear whether this man was the same suspicious man seen by the Swedish couple. Adding to the mystery, investigators discovered an entry in Trudy's diary that read, "German crutches." While it's unclear whether this referred to the man seen near the crime scene, it became an important lead. Some theorized that the perpetrator might have faked an injury to gain Trudy's trust. The image of a German-speaking man on crutches near the scene became a central focus of the investigation. Photographs taken by tourists on the day of the slaying were analyzed years later using advanced technology. In one image, a man fitting this description was seen standing near the Geranger ferry dock. And yeah, this is one of those times I'm going to have all the people who just listen take a look at the screen if you're able. Some people say that the man in this picture actually has 2 intact legs, despite his appearance, suggesting that he's rigged himself up to appear disabled. I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments, since honestly I can't really tell one way or the other with complete certainty. In spite of his distinct appearance, no one has ever been able to identify the man, and he's never come forward to the police. Several other individuals were also scrutinized over the years. One theory posited that the perpetrator could have been a local, given the knowledge required to conceal the body so effectively. However, personally, while I've read this theory, I have my doubts. I'm not sure just how effectively her body was concealed, given that she was found in less than 2 weeks. Trudy's case has faced several significant obstacles from the get-go. First, the remote location of Geranger meant resources were limited. Despite this, investigators had to coordinate efforts across a wide geographical area and with international law enforcement. Second, forensic science in the 1990s lacked the capabilities we have today. Although Trudy's body was examined thoroughly, DNA evidence wasn't processed with the sophistication available now. It's unclear to me if any DNA has been submitted for forensic genealogical testing, especially since almost all the sources for this case are in Norwegian or German. Finally, the transient nature of the town's population created a logistical nightmare. Many potential witnesses left Geranger before police could interview them, and some were never located. Efforts to track down these individuals decades later have proven difficult. It's possible that the perpetrator deliberately picked this location to commit his heinous act for this exact reason. Over the years, Trudy's case has been reopened multiple times, reflecting the determination of authorities to find answers. Personally, I have a lot of hope that this one will be solved in the fairly near future. Forensic genealogy is rapidly closing out major cases that people thought might remain cold forever. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to share this video with your friends and family. If each of you watching would share this video with 2 people, that would allow me to spend significantly more time working on content creation. On December 27, 2022, Sierra Chapman from Trotwood, Ohio, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Despite extensive investigations, her whereabouts are still unknown. At the time of her disappearance, she was living with her sister on Cambridge Avenue in Dayton, Ohio, and was a mother to her teenage son. On December 27, 2022, around 4:30 a.m., Sierra was captured on surveillance footage leaving her ex-boyfriend's apartment complex on Autumn Woods Drive in Trotwood. She had gone there to exchange personal items following their recent breakup. The footage shows her getting into her silver 2014 Cadillac SUV and driving away. This was the last confirmed sighting of her. 2 days later, on December 29th, Sierra's sister reported her missing after unsuccessful attempts to contact her. The situation became more concerning when, on January 6, 2023, her SUV was found abandoned on Jewel Avenue in Middletown, Ohio, approximately 20 miles from Trotwood. Inside the vehicle were her purse and other personal belongings, but there was no sign of Sierra. According to her family, she had no known connections to Middletown, making the location of her vehicle particularly puzzling. The Dayton Police Department, in collaboration with the FBI, has been actively investigating Sierra's disappearance. Given the circumstances, authorities have labeled her case as suspicious, and the statements released are extremely telling. Major Brian Johns of the Dayton Police Department stated, "She didn't go missing by accident. This was a very well planned out, well orchestrated incident, and people know." This indicates that investigators believe there are individuals with considerable knowledge about the events leading to her disappearance. In the months following her disappearance, multiple searches were conducted, including large-scale efforts involving volunteers, drones, ATVs, and canine units. Despite these extensive efforts, no significant leads were uncovered. Sierra's family has been vocal in their appeals for information, emphasizing that her disappearance is out of character, especially given her close relationship with her son. The FBI has offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the capture of the person or people responsible for her disappearance. The family has expressed hope that the reward offered might encourage someone to come forward with crucial information. Given the statements made by the authorities in this case, I suspect they have a strong suspicion as to who's responsible for Sierra's disappearance. Unfortunately, her case hasn't gotten the attention it deserves thus far, so I feel like there's a non-zero chance someone watching right now may hold the key to closing Sierra's case. The Tagan incident, also known as the Teikoku Bank incident, took place on January 26, 1948, in Tokyo. This horrific incident, which involved an individual posing as a government official and poisoning 16 people, shocked and appalled Japan and the world. To fully understand why the Tagan incident captured so much attention, it helps to know a bit about the backdrop against which it happened. Japan in 1948 was still grappling with the devastation of World War II. The country's infrastructure lay in ruins, the economy was fragile, and the general population was struggling with shortages of basic necessities. Many people had lost faith in traditional institutions and were often suspicious of one another. Japan experienced significant rising crime rates that occurred in the turbulent environment right after the war ended. These criminals were the woodpeckers of mistrust that unrelentingly pecked apart the branches of social cohesion. On top of the social and economic troubles, the US-led occupation authorities were reorganizing government structures, including the police force. Legal institutions were undergoing reforms intended to reshape Japan into a democratic state. While these reforms had many positive goals, they also meant that the investigative methods and judicial processes used in the past were being questioned and, in some cases, rapidly replaced. It was in this uncertain setting that the Tagan incident occurred. The Tagan incident refers to the Teikoku Bank, which had several branches throughout Tokyo. On January 26, 1948, a man who claimed to be a public health official entered the Shinamachi branch of Teikoku Bank in the Toshima ward of Tokyo. This man said he was there on urgent government business, explaining that an outbreak of dysentery was raging in the area. He warned the staff and a few customers who were present that they needed immediate inoculation or medication to prevent the disease. Because infectious diseases were still a genuine worry in post-war Japan, no one at the bank appears to have questioned his instructions. The man gave them a liquid, which he said was medicine they had to drink on the spot. Moments after consuming the beverage, most of those who drank it collapsed. 12 of them died from what turned out to be poison. 4 ultimately survived, but were left unconscious for a time and suffered from long-term impacts from the poisoning. The perpetrator fled with a fairly modest sum of money considering the carnage inflicted. Reports vary, but it was somewhere in the range of the equivalent of 2,000 American dollars at the time. In the immediate wake of the slayings, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department launched a major investigation. They questioned numerous witnesses, including the 4 survivors who'd been rendered unconscious, but eventually recovered enough to describe what happened. However, the perpetrator had left behind little physical evidence, and no one remembered small details, like the official's face or clothing, well enough to provide a clear description. Because Japan was in a state of flux, with shortages affecting everything from food to office supplies, the police didn't have the resources they would have had prior to the war. It's hard to imagine an investigation like this being done on a shoestring budget, but that's what happened. The police gathered empty vials from the bank, which later turned out to contain poison as expected. But you'll notice I'm not saying which kind. Keep this in mind. Police also collected statements from the survivors who insisted they had believed the perpetrator was an official from the Ministry of Health. According to these survivors, he used official-sounding terminology that convinced the bank's employees they were facing an urgent public health crisis. In addition to the difficulty of identifying the suspect, the investigators were racing against time. Public pressure to solve the case was enormous, and the government itself was under scrutiny because the perp had used a fake public health ruse. People wanted answers. Who would commit such a horrendous crime, and how could the authorities let him slip away? Also, since public health outbreaks were a very serious issue in immediate post-war Japan, apprehending the perp was necessary to restore public order. Imagine you're a Japanese citizen approached by a legitimate public health official in the days and weeks following this incident, while the perpetrator was still on the loose. Would you willingly subject yourself to any form of treatment from this official? I have to think that most of you may think, nah, I'll roll the dice on this one, which of course would lead to even more deadly public health outbreaks of diseases like dysentery. Political pressure from both inside Japan and from the American occupation forces was immense. Several months passed before the police zeroed in on a suspect named Sadamichi Hirasawa. He was an artist known for his paintings who supposedly had some eccentric habits and wasn't exactly trusted by his neighbors. Police said they found circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime, including the possibility that he'd once posed as a government official for some other more conventional scam. More controversially, investigators claimed that Hirasawa provided a confession. However, there'd later be accusations that this confession was coerced or otherwise unreliable, partly because of harsh interrogation techniques used at the time. And if you're familiar with the Japanese authorities' investigative techniques, let's just say Persona 5's frame story isn't too far from the truth. Hirasawa was eventually indicted and went to trial. The prosecution argued that he was motivated by financial gain and that the method he used, poisoning, was an attempt to make sure there would be no witnesses. The defense countered by questioning the credibility of the police investigation and emphasizing the lack of direct evidence. However, for reasons which we'll discuss shortly, his defense counsel appears to have pulled a lot of punches. Which, hey, when your client is accused of one of the most heinous acts imaginable, maybe don't do that. Nevertheless, the court found him guilty in 1950, and he was sentenced to death. From the outset, Hirasawa's conviction was controversial, both within Japan and around the world, due to the high-profile nature of the case. Critics pointed out that no one could recall his face clearly, and there was no physical evidence conclusively tying him to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no unique items left behind. Additionally, The poison used in the incident was said to be a combination of cyanide compounds, but the exact makeup was not clearly documented in the initial investigations. That gap in the records led some to question whether the police had thoroughly tested or analyzed the substance. And yes, you heard that correctly. The police gathered evidence from the vials, but apparently didn't have the resources to properly test what the substance was. At the trial, the prosecution claimed that Hirasawa used potassium cyanide, which they claimed was readily available at the time. However, the Japanese government's own investigation questioned this, stating that it was probably acetone cyanohydrin. Notably, this compound would have only been available to people with access to decommissioned Japanese military equipment. There were also allegations that certain investigative procedures were bungled or rushed. For instance, some surviving witnesses later mentioned that their initial statements about the suspect's appearance were either not recorded accurately or dismissed by the police. Then there's the claim that Hirasawa's confession was extracted under duress or was actually fabricated. After the war, Japanese law enforcement agencies were sometimes accused of using severe interrogation tactics. Notably, many of these police officers had served similar roles in the notoriously brutal Japanese Imperial Army. Despite all these controversies, the courts continued to uphold Hirasawa's guilt. Appeals were made over the decades, and numerous supporters, including legal experts, writers, and activists, campaigned for a retrial. They argued that the entire case was built on questionable or circumstantial evidence, yet the justice system never granted a formal retrial. One of the strangest aspects of this case is that while Hirasawa was officially sentenced to be eliminated, he was never executed. He spent the rest of his life in prison, where he continued to protest his innocence and insist on a new trial. From the early 1950s until his death in 1987, he remained on death row, making him one of the longest-serving death row inmates in the history of Japan. Some have suggested that Japan's government might have had private doubts about his guilt, which could explain why he was never executed. Others think it was more a matter of bureaucratic delays and the intricacy of the appeals process. Regardless of the reason, Hirasawa remained behind bars until he died of natural causes at the age of 95. Over time, various theories have emerged about who might have committed the Tegan incident, if not Hirasawa. One popular idea connects the poisoner to the Japanese military's infamous Unit 731, which had been involved in chemical and biological experimentation during the war. And yeah, fair warning, you may not want to Google that one. Seriously. According to this theory, someone trained in chemical warfare might have used knowledge gained from wartime experiments to create the poison. However, there's no conclusive evidence to back this up, and critics argue that it's just a rumor that feeds off Japan's post-war anxieties. Another theory speculates the real culprit was an imposter who'd already pulled off a few smaller cons by impersonating government officials. Some doubt has also been cast on whether the motive was truly robbery. The amount stolen wasn't huge, and the perpetrator's approach seemed unusually sophisticated for a straightforward theft. That's prompted speculation that the culprit might have been pursuing some personal vendetta against one of the people in the bank. To cover up the true nature of the crime, under this theory, the perpetrator simply poisoned everyone and robbed the bank to cover it all up. And I'm not quite sure why, but this seems so much more evil than the theory that he was just robbing a bank, even if the results are the exact same. Notably, the statute of limitations passed on the crime in the 1980s, and if the true perpetrator was in his 20s, it's theoretically possible that he's still alive. According to the Gospel of John, the seamless robe was a garment worn by Jesus during his crucifixion. The soldiers, recognizing its seamless construction was unnatural in a good way, chose not to divide it but cast lots to determine its owner. Over the millennia, various traditions have claimed possession of this relic, each with its own historical narrative and degree of authenticity. One of the most prominent claims originates from Trier, Germany. Legend suggests that Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine the Great, discovered the seamless robe during her pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 4th century. She is believed to have sent the robe to Trier, where Constantine had previously resided. The first documented reference to the robe in Trier dates back to 1196, when Archbishop Johann I consecrated an altar containing the relic. Over time, sections of silk were added to the robe, and in the 19th century, it was treated with a rubber solution in an attempt to preserve it. These modifications have rendered the original fabric unsuitable for carbon dating, leaving its authenticity uncertain. The robe is typically kept folded in a reliquary and is rarely displayed. In 1512, during an imperial diet, Emperor Maximilian I requested to see the Holy Robe, leading to its public exhibition. This event initiated a tradition of pilgrimages, with the relic being displayed at irregular intervals, the most recent being in 2012. The periods between displays can be long, with some lasting as long as 150 years. So if you're really into the idea of seeing this version of the seamless robe, you better book your pilgrimage flight as soon as the next showing's announced. Another popular, though more dubious claim to the seamless robe is found in France. According to this tradition, Empress Irene of Byzantium gifted the robe to Charlemagne around the year 800. Charlemagne then entrusted it to his daughter, Theodora, who was the abbess of a convent in Argenteuil. The earliest known document referencing the robe in Argenteuil dates to 1156, authored by Archbishop Hugh of Rouen, who described it as the garment of the child Jesus. Over time, records began to change, and a legend developed around the relic that it was the seamless robe, an even more sacred relic than mere baby clothing. During the French Revolution, the parish priest cut the robe into pieces to protect it from desecration, with many pieces being lost. Not to be left out, the Eastern Orthodox Church also holds various traditions concerning the whereabouts of the seamless robe. In Georgian lore, a Jewish rabbi named Elias, present at the crucifixion, purchased the robe from the Roman soldier who won the bet for it and then subsequently brought it to Georgia. A portion of this garment is said to have been taken to Russia sometime in the 17th century. While historians and theologians remain skeptical of all claims to the seamless robe, the strongest relative claim appears to be that of the German robe. That said, like with all claims of religious artifacts, especially those directly associated with major league religious figures like Jesus, it may always be best to err on the side of caution. The case of missing pilot and smuggler Wallace Thrasher has baffled investigators and true crime enthusiasts for decades, because the case is straight up a Hollywood movie plot. And just to be clear right off the bat, this isn't your typical missing persons case. It involves no less than 3 plane crashes. Thrasher was indicted for various trafficking offenses in the mid-1980s, then disappeared under circumstances that remain hotly debated. Despite numerous rumors, including that he died in a plane crash or faked his own death, conclusive evidence of his fate has never been found. Wallace Leon Thrasher was born on April 21, 1946. Little is publicly documented about his youth, but by the late 1970s he was living in southwestern Virginia. Thrasher had a wife and child, and associates described him as charismatic and helpful, if sometimes private. At some point in his adult life, Thrasher took up flying airplanes. Those who knew him said he was a confident pilot who seemed to enjoy the independence and thrill that came with aviation. In the early 1980s, allegations surfaced that Thrasher was using his aviation skills for illegal ends. Rumors swirled in local communities of substance-filled planes landing on clandestine airstrips late at night. While some heard whispers about Thrasher's alleged activities, It was not until the mid-1980s that federal and state officials started to build a formal case against him. Authorities began investigating Thrasher after multiple reports indicated he was involved in smuggling large quantities of weed and coke from South America into the U.S. According to investigators, Thrasher would fly his plane to sites in the Caribbean or Central America, load it with dope, then transport the contraband back into the rural American South. Law enforcement agencies across the country began sharing intelligence on Thrasher. They believed he might have been part of a larger trafficking network, a network that employed local airstrips, remote back roads, and clandestine properties to hide substantial shipments. It was thought that his substances would be transported to major distribution hubs such as Chicago for further processing. This all sounds pretty standard so far, but this is where things are going to go off the rails and get real weird real quick. On October 17, 1984, a plane flown by one of Thrasher's pilots crashed in Virginia, and 1,200 pounds of weed was discovered. Authorities were able to prove that Thrasher was the owner of the plane, but just as they went to make the arrest, a shocking twist occurred. A newspaper reported that Wallace Thrasher had died in a plane crash in Jamaica. The authorities went to Jamaica and obtained the death certificate, which they determined to be false. They further found no evidence whatsoever of any crash occurring in Jamaica on the date in question. Thrasher's wife later revealed that after October 17, 1984, her husband loaded up $250,000 into a plane for a trip to Belize. She had believed it was one of his standard refill runs to Latin America. Despite authorities issuing an arrest warrant and conducting a significant investigation, no leads came up on Thrasher. In 1986, Thrasher allegedly died in yet another plane crash, this time in Belize. And to prove that Wallace Thrasher really definitely was 100% not living for real this time, a friend of his showed up with his wedding ring recovered from the crash site. Unlike the plane crash in Jamaica, this was actually a real one, and the authorities checked it out, only to discover the extreme severity of the crash. The flames had been so intense that the entire structure of the plane had melted into the ground, calling into question how a pristine wedding ring could have been pulled from the crash site. So I know the theory that the person is still alive can be brought up in relation to every missing person case ever. But I'm just going to come out and say that this one hits different, and in a big way. The questionable plane crash reports, contradictory death certificates, and suspiciously intact wedding ring suggest he orchestrated elaborate deceptions to evade prosecution. And it's important to remember that the authorities had him dead to rights on 1,200 pounds of weed. He was cooked to the point of being well done. Perhaps Thrasher leveraged connections in the smuggling underworld to fabricate a connection to the Belize crash, counting on remote foreign locations and corruption to conceal his tracks. After all, a few well-placed bribes, falsified documents, and planted evidence could enable a wealthy, charismatic pilot to vanish without a trace. Instead of dying in Belize, Thrasher may have slipped into a life under a new identity. With his fortune from smuggling operations, he could have settled somewhere very far from prying eyes that could perhaps only be reached by a landing strip. The dramatic recovery of Thrasher's wedding ring from a fiery crash site reads more like stage theater than hard proof. I think another option needs to be considered as well, though. Wallace Thrasher had accumulated a significant amount of wealth, and there was a ton of heat on him from American authorities. It's always possible that one of his associates had him eliminated, bringing the heat down on their criminal operation, while also allowing the associate to confiscate his illicit earnings. Wicca is a modern pagan, earth-centered religion, and is often considered part of the broader category of neo-paganism. It was founded in England during the early to mid-20th century by Gerald Gardner, who claimed he was initiated into a secret witch coven called the New Forest Coven in 1939. Gardner publicly introduced Wicca in the 1950s, blending elements of pre-Christian beliefs, ceremonial magic, and Western esotericism. He popularized it through books like Witchcraft Today in 1954 and The Meaning of Witchcraft in 1959. The religion quickly spread and evolved, especially after it was brought to the United States in the 1960s. Wicca is sometimes referred to as the craft, partly in an effort to dissociate it from Christian ideas of what witchcraft traditionally involved. Its foundation is heavily based on the writings of Margaret Murray, who proposed the witch cult hypothesis, claiming that a pre-Christian, pan-European pagan religion survived underground. Murray's ideas were largely discredited, but they heavily influenced the portrayal of Wicca as a continuation of ancient traditions. Gardner's writings leaned on this hypothesis, as well as borrowing material from earlier occultists like Aleister Crowley and Charles Leland. Gardner even created the Book of Shadows, a central text for Wiccan rituals, which he initially claimed was ancient, but was later revealed to be largely compiled from various modern sources. Doreen Valiente, an influential figure in the development of Wicca, joined Gardner's coven in the 1950s. Valiente revised much of Gardner's Book of Shadows to remove elements directly borrowed from Crowley and to craft rituals that felt more authentic and meaningful to practitioners. She also helped write foundational texts and incorporated the Wiccan Rede into the religion, a key moral statement that emphasizes practitioners can do what you will so long as you harm none. Wicca's structure is decentralized, which means there are various branches or traditions with different beliefs and practices. Gardnerian Wicca, the original tradition founded by Gardner, emphasizes initiation and hierarchical coven structure. Alexandrian Wicca, another significant branch, was founded by Alex Sanders in the 1960s and incorporates similar beliefs but with a more flexible approach. There are also non-traditional eclectic forms of Wicca that draw from diverse spiritual sources and often don't require initiation through a coven. Eclectic Wiccans may practice alone as solitary practitioners or in loosely organized groups. Wiccan theology is generally duotheistic, worshiping a goddess and a god, often conceptualized as the triple goddess, associated with the moon, and the horned god, linked to nature and the sun. These deities are frequently seen as archetypal figures representing feminine and masculine energies, and many Wiccans view them as aspects of a greater, unified divinity. In practice, Wiccans may worship these deities under different names from various mythologies. Some traditions are strictly polytheistic, while others take a more monotheistic or pantheistic approach. Notably, some Wiccans are atheists and agnostics, believing that the divinities worshipped are archetypical figures. Rituals are central to Wiccan practice and often take place within a circle, a sacred space created to focus energy and provide a boundary between the physical and spiritual realms. Common rituals include esbats, which are ceremonies held on full moons dedicated to the goddess, and sabbats, seasonal festivals marking the wheel of the year. These festivals are deeply tied to the cycles of nature, reflecting Wicca's emphasis on the interconnectedness of life and the earth. Magic is also an integral part of Wicca, often seen as a natural force that can be manipulated through the use of rituals, symbols, and intentions. The practice of magic in Wicca isn't focused on coercion, but rather on harmony and balance. The rule of three is an ethical guideline suggesting that whatever energy a person sends out, positive or negative, will return to them threefold. This belief emphasizes the harmony of all things and the belief that acting in a harmful nature is swiftly punished. This principle, along with the Wiccan Rede, forms the basis of Wiccan ethical practice emphasizing personal responsibility and non-harm. Okay, so now I need to circle back to the origins of Wicca so we can actually get into the mystery here. Gardner, considered the father of modern Wicca, as discussed at the beginning of this section, claimed that Wicca was an ancient pagan religion, secretly passed down through the generations. According to Gardner, he was initiated into one of these surviving covens in 1939 by a woman named Dorothy Clutterbuck in the New Forest area of England. And yes, for those wondering, Dorothy Clutterbuck was very much a real person. Notably, at least publicly, she presented herself as a practicing Christian, which some have suggested indicates that she was definitely not a witch. Respectfully, I disagree with this view, given that the witch cult hypothesis postulates that existing covens survived by having their members pretend to be devout Christians. Further, there's analogous situations throughout history, such as crypto-Jews in Spain and crypto-Christians in Japan during various periods. Of course, none of this is to say that Dorothy Clutterbuck was actually a witch, but the fact that she was outwardly Christian doesn't automatically invalidate all claims by Gardner. While Gardner's version of Wicca drew inspiration from earlier traditions, evidence for the unbroken lineage he claimed remains tenuous at this time. However, of course, I must emphasize that he claimed to have gone public with an esoteric tradition. As such, I wouldn't expect substantial historical records of any such tradition to be preserved, or to be preserved in a way which would be unambiguous to an outsider. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to share this video with your friends and family. Click the share button and send my video to 2 people who you think might enjoy it. I'll be forever grateful that you did. Also, quick, very special shout out to Bella the cat. Rest well, you've earned it. This case is a special request from subscriber Derek Ronk, who wants to bring attention to the case of his slain cousin, Elizabeth Chapman. And just a quick warning before we get into this case. There's very little out there on her, and the sources I'm relying on are less reliable than I would usually consult. Elizabeth, a 32-year-old woman from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, was found deceased in Washington County, Utah, in August 2017. Her remains were discovered near the Virgin River by a family out for a hike in the remote region. Her body was in an advanced state of decomposition, which initially made identification challenging. However, through collaborative efforts between the Washington County Sheriff's Office and the Utah Office of the Medical Examiner, her identity was confirmed. Investigators sought assistance from the public, requesting information from anyone who had seen or interacted with Chapman between the second week of July and the end of August 2017. Despite these efforts, details surrounding her activities during this period remained extremely scarce. It's been noted that Elizabeth had been in Las Vegas, Nevada prior to her death, and it was believed she might have been using Craigslist to arrange rides according to an unverified source. Her last known location was reported to be the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, again according to an unverified source I found online. And normally, of course, I wouldn't be presenting a source like an unverified post on a message board, but given the limited evidence in Elizabeth's case, something is better than nothing. The circumstances of Chapman's death led to various speculations, including the possibility of foul play. However, as of the latest available information, no conclusive evidence has been publicly disclosed to confirm the exact cause or manner of her death. The case remains open, with authorities continuing to seek information that could shed light on the events leading up to her untimely demise. If you have any information whatsoever in relation to Elizabeth Chapman's case, please contact the Washington County Sheriff's Office in Utah with details. Demonic possession is a topic found within many occult traditions and refers to the belief that an external spirit or entity, often malevolent, takes control of an individual's body and mind. Throughout history, numerous cultures have recognized phenomena akin to demonic possession. In ancient Mesopotamia, for instance, ailments and psychological disturbances were frequently attributed to malevolent spirits. Similarly, in ancient Greece, the concept of daimones encompassed both benevolent and malevolent entities believed to influence human behavior. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church's interpretation of possession was predominantly demonic, leading to numerous exorcisms as well as witch hunts. Religious and occult traditions worldwide show remarkable similarities in signs and symptoms of demonic possession. One of the most commonly reported signs is unusual physical strength. Individuals believed to be possessed are said to exhibit strength that far exceeds their natural capacity. Cases from historical and contemporary accounts describe people, often of modest build, performing feats that would typically require far greater physical power. This phenomenon is especially unsettling for witnesses and is frequently interpreted as evidence of an external entity taking control of the body. Those who report witnessing such strength describe the event as something that defies normal human limitations, suggesting an unnatural influence at work. Another prominent sign of possession is an aversion to sacred objects, particularly religious symbols like crosses, holy water, or scripture. In numerous reports, possessed individuals display strong, even violent reactions to these objects. This aversion is often accompanied by expressions of fear, aggression, or disgust, leading many to conclude that a malevolent entity inhabits the individual and recoils from items representing goodness. Possession cases sometimes feature instances where the affected individual speaks languages unknown to them. Often termed xenoglossy, this phenomenon involves a person suddenly articulating phrases or entire conversations in a foreign language they've never studied or encountered before. This is particularly disturbing to observers, as it seems to reveal knowledge that the person could not have acquired through natural means. In the Christian context, reports of xenoglossy during possession generally include use of ancient languages, like Latin, Ancient Greek, or Aramaic. Personality shifts are also observed, where an ordinarily gentle individual may exhibit aggressive, hostile, or blasphemous behavior. This change can seem so drastic that it appears as if another consciousness has taken over, with the original personality entirely suppressed. However, these signs aren't universally accepted as evidence of possession. Many skeptics and mental health professionals argue that these symptoms can stem from psychological or neurological disorders rather than an external spirit or entity. Conditions such as dissociative identity disorder, psychosis, or epilepsy can produce behaviors that mimic possession symptoms, including personality shifts and language disturbances. Psychological explanations suggest that individuals displaying signs of possession may be experiencing an intense mental health crisis rather than a supernatural event. Exorcism, the act of expelling a possessing entity, varies across cultures. In Christian traditions, it generally involves invoking the name of Jesus Christ to command the demon to depart, and citing passages where Jesus combated demonic entities spiritually. Jesse Galganoff, a 22-year-old from Montreal, Canada, embarked on an 8-month backpacking journey through South America and Southeast Asia in September 2017. Having recently graduated from Wesleyan University in Connecticut, he planned to begin medical school upon his return from his adventure. On September 24, 2017, Jesse departed Montreal for Lima, Peru, where he began the South American leg of the journey. After spending a few days in Lima, he traveled to Huaraz, a city known for its proximity to the Cordillera Blanca mountain range. On September 28th, he informed his mother, Elisa Klaman, that he intended to hike the Santa Cruz Trail. This is a popular 50-kilometer trek, and he informed her that he would be out of communication for approximately 4 days, or maybe slightly longer, depending on conditions. He assured her he would reach out by the end of the day on October 2nd, 2017. When that date passed without any contact, concern started to grow among his family and friends. The initial search efforts faced numerous challenges. Peruvian authorities conducted investigations, but progress was limited. In November 2017, Elisa enlisted the help of Magnus International, a search and rescue company specializing in operations in remote areas. The team utilized drones, conducted interviews, and coordinated with local authorities to trace Jesse's steps. Despite their extensive efforts, no physical evidence whatsoever was found of Jesse. During the investigation, 2 French hikers reported camping with Jesse on September 30th. They noted he appeared disoriented, possibly due to altitude sickness, but seemed better the next day when they parted ways. This information provided a crucial key element in the timeline, but didn't yield any further leads. As months passed without new information, the theory of foul play gained traction. The lack of any trace, no belongings or remains, suggested to investigators that someone might have intentionally concealed evidence. This perspective intensified the search, but concrete answers remained elusive. The emotional and financial toll on Jesse's family was immense. Elisa made multiple trips to Peru, retracing her son's steps on the Santa Cruz Trail to understand his journey and seek closure. The search efforts, including hiring specialized teams and conducting extensive ground and aerial searches, amounted to over $1 million. According to some reports, the family completely exhausted themselves financially, doing absolutely everything they could to find Jesse. Unfortunately, despite these extremely extensive efforts, they're no closer to finding a resolution to his mysterious disappearance. In December 1987, 39-year-old Charles Southern Jr., an English professor at a Chicago community college, vanished without a trace. His disappearance has long been linked to his involvement with conscious development, a spiritual movement founded by Terry Hoffman that was long accused of being a cult by detractors. This case remains unsolved, with many believing that Southern's association with Hoffman played a significant role in his mysterious vanishing. Terry Hoffman established conscious development in the 1970s, attracting individuals seeking spiritual enlightenment. The organization, however, has been labeled by some as cult-like due to its secretive practices and the undue influence Hoffman appeared to wield over her followers. Members were taught about battles against Black Lords, malevolent entities that Hoffman claimed attacked her on various planes of existence. She urged her inner circle to construct psychic shields for protection, fostering an environment of fear and dependency among her adherents. Southern's quest for spiritual growth led him to quickly ascend to a leadership position in conscious development, conducting meditation sessions and classes. He even visited Hoffman's home in Dallas, Texas, indicating his deepening involvement. Southern began to exhibit increasingly bizarre behavior the deeper he got involved with Hoffman. His family grew extremely concerned when he was found wandering Chicago's streets, speaking incoherently, a stark contrast to his previously stable demeanor. Following this incident, Southern was hospitalized for a period of time. Despite his release and return to routine activities, friends noted his growing disenchantment with Hoffman, though he remained active in her organization. In December 1987, Southern planned a 2-week trip to India during his college's winter break. When he failed to return as scheduled, his family investigated his home. Inside, they discovered his passport, devoid of any entry stamps, suggesting he never embarked on the journey. More disturbingly, they found a vial containing a substance similar to curare, an extremely potent poison traditionally used in blow dart-based weaponry. Further, a winter coat and hat were neatly folded inside out on a ceremonial stool, which has been reported to be a Nigerian tribal symbol for either death or transition. Additionally, two poorly written notes, appearing to be wills, were found, naming Hoffman as the executor of his estate. Hoffman denied any involvement in Southern's disappearance and was never charged in connection with the case. However, her name has been associated with several untimely deaths of her followers and close associates, often under suspicious circumstances. Many of these individuals had also named Hoffman as a beneficiary in their wills, leading to allegations of manipulation and undue influence. Despite these controversies, concrete evidence linking Hoffman to any criminal activities has remained elusive, and she passed away in 2015, a free woman. Given the known details, it seems plausible that Southern's growing doubts about Hoffman's teachings may have led him to a crossroads. Observers note that his mental well-being deteriorated soon after he fully embraced the group's esoteric practices. The discovery of curare in his apartment points to a potentially sinister element in his final days. Some speculate he was coerced or manipulated into a final ritual, especially considering the tribal symbol implied by his inverted winter coat and hat. There's no proof Hoffman orchestrated Southern's disappearance, yet the pattern of unusual deaths and alleged undue influence cast a long shadow over his case. In May 2011, a perplexing event unfolded in Mungyong, South Korea, that caught international headlines. A 58-year-old taxi driver, identified only by his very common surname, Kim, was found dead in a manner eerily reminiscent of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This incident not only shocked the local community, but also drew international attention due to its unusual and disturbing nature. Kim's body was discovered on May 1st, 2011, in an abandoned stone quarry. He was found wearing only his underwear and a crown of thorns, with his hands and feet nailed to a wooden cross. Additionally, he had a stab wound on his right side and nylon strings tied around his neck, suggesting a deliberate attempt to emulate the crucifixion of Jesus. The initial discovery raised suspicions of foul play. However, after a thorough investigation, police concluded that Kim had orchestrated his own death without external assistance. Also, if censorship wasn't such a big thing around these parts, I could have replaced those 7 words with 2. But hey, I'm not going to change the system. Evidence supporting this conclusion included detailed notes found at the scene, outlining plans for the crucifixion, as well as tools such as a hammer, an electric drill, and nails. It appeared that Kim had drilled holes in his hands, allowing him to slip them over nails pre-positioned on the cross. He also nailed his feet to the structure, tied his neck to it, and inflicted a stab wound, likely to mimic the wound Jesus suffered from a Roman soldier's spear. Further investigation into Kim's background revealed that he was a devout Christian, described by acquaintances as having fanatical religious views. Prior to his death, he had closed his bank account and canceled his mobile phone contract, actions interpreted as preparations for ending his life. The case took an additional twist when it was revealed that the person who discovered Kim's body was a former Christian minister named Ju Hyun-soo. Ju and Kim had met 2 years prior, and Kim had been a follower of Ju's religious blog. The proximity of the crucifixion site to Ju's residence and their prior acquaintance led police to investigate whether Ju had any involvement in the incident. However, Ju denied any participation, stating that he had not been in contact with Kim since their initial meeting. While many theorize that this case may have been covered up by powerful individuals, to me all evidence suggests that Kim was just a deeply unwell individual. Furthermore, it's not unusual that a religious fanatic would follow a blog of a local pastor. In fact, it may have been more unusual if he had no connections with the community. Big shout out to subscriber Ashley Krause, who suggested this obscure case in the comments. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Hope you're enjoying the latest entry in this series. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and to check out my other channels on my channel page. Solipsism is a philosophical theory that posits the self as the only thing that can be known to exist for certain. This theory suggests that only one's mind is sure to exist, while the existence of anything outside the mind, including the external world and other people, is uncertain. There are three primary forms of solipsism: metaphysical, epistemological, and methodological. Metaphysical solipsism asserts that nothing exists outside of one's own mind. In this extreme form of subjective idealism, the external world, other people, and even abstract concepts like time and causality have no independent existence beyond one's mental states. This is because all of these entities are seen as mere constructs or representations within the self's mind. For a metaphysical solipsist, reality is the individual's personal experience, and anything outside of it, including unperceived objects, does not exist in any substantial sense. One argument for metaphysical solipsism is that there is no direct or necessary connection between mental experiences and physical objects. Just because someone perceives something, it doesn't necessarily follow that the object exists independently of their mind. For instance, one could be dreaming, hallucinating, or misled by their senses. In this view, it is conceivable that the entirety of reality is merely a projection of the mind itself. While metaphysical solipsism asserts that only the self exists, epistemological solipsism is more modest, claiming that knowledge of anything beyond one's own mind is uncertain. In this view, one does not necessarily deny the existence of the external world or other minds, but argues that their existence can never be confirmed. Since the self has no direct access to any reality beyond its thoughts, it cannot be certain that anything external to the mind truly exists. This form of solipsism is less a declaration about the nature of reality and more a skeptical position regarding knowledge. René Descartes' famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," touches on the core of epistemological solipsism. This famous line acknowledges that the act of thinking proves the existence of the thinker, but offers no conclusive proof of the existence of anything beyond the self. Methodological solipsism does not necessarily assert the truth of solipsism, but instead uses it as a starting point for philosophical inquiry. In this view, the individual self and its experiences are the only valid foundation for developing knowledge. This position is commonly used as a form of extreme skepticism, questioning the assumptions we make about the world. While methodological solipsism emphasizes that knowledge must begin with the self, it does not necessarily conclude that only the self exists. It is often used as a tool to explore broader philosophical problems, particularly in the context of skepticism about perception and knowledge. The primary argument for solipsism rests on the idea that individuals have direct access only to their own mental states, thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions. Since individuals can't experience the world outside their own consciousness, the existence of anything beyond their mind is speculative at best. Even when individuals interact with what they perceive to be an external world, they are ultimately only experiencing representations within their own mind. For instance, when one sees an object like a tree, what is experienced is not the tree itself, but the image or perception of the tree in the mind. Solipsists argue that there is no way to bridge the gap between perception and external reality. The only certainty is the existence of the perception itself, not the object perceived. Moreover, solipsism suggests that because all experiences are necessarily private and subjective, there can be no external verification of other minds. Each person's mental states are inaccessible to others, and one can never be certain that other minds, similar to one's own, exist. This lack of access to other minds reinforces the solipsistic view that only the self can be known to exist. Some theorists argue a solipsistic worldview is promoted by the elite to maintain control over the masses. According to this belief, the elite create a carefully curated version of reality through media, education, and technological control. This worldview implies that individuals are trapped in a constructed illusion, unable to perceive the true nature of existence. This aligns with solipsism's core idea that one can only be sure of their own mind's existence. Proponents argue that this manufactured reality disconnects people from authentic experiences and critical thinking, making them easier to control. By monopolizing access to information and shaping cultural narratives, the elite allegedly reinforce their dominance, ensuring that only their perspective is accepted as truth. This idea reflects solipsism by casting doubt on the existence of an external reality independent of the powerful few, who are seen as manipulating perceptions to serve their interests. The Paul is dead theory is one of the most infamous and enduring theories in music history. It posits that Paul McCartney, the legendary Beatle, died in a car crash in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a look-alike. This theory first emerged in the late 1960s and quickly captivated the public, gaining momentum through a series of supposed clues embedded in their songs, album covers, and appearances. The rumors surrounding McCartney's death first surfaced in 1969, although speculations about his well-being began earlier. In December 1965, McCartney was involved in a moped accident, leading to minor injuries, which prompted worries about his health. A second wave of rumors followed in 1967, when some speculated that a car accident had killed McCartney, but these claims did not gain widespread traction at the time. The theory exploded into public consciousness in October 1969, when a caller named Tom phoned a Detroit radio station and informed disc jockey Russ Gibb of McCartney's passing. The caller urged Gibb to play the Beatles' song Revolution 9 backward, claiming it revealed the message, "Turn me on, dead man." The strange audio discovery stirred up significant interest, and soon after, a student from the University of Michigan published a satirical article discussing the theory. In this article, he dissected the Beatles' Abbey Road album cover as evidence of McCartney's death. This article, titled "McCartney Dead: New Evidence Brought to Light," was taken far more seriously than the author intended, and newspapers across the United States began reporting on it. Also, I love that mainstream newspapers were reporting on details from a parody article from a college campus, apparently conducting zero fact-checking. As the rumors snowballed after October 1969, the story became an international sensation. Radio stations across the United States began to discuss the theory, with some disc jockeys dedicating entire shows to dissecting Beatles songs for hidden clues. To put it in our modern context, the theory went viral, and every content creator had to pile on to get a piece of the action. The theory suggests that the Beatles, along with their management and the British government, covered up McCartney's death to avoid mass hysteria and protect the band's profitability. The replacement, supposedly a Scottish orphan named Billy Shears, was selected due to his striking resemblance to McCartney and his similar musical abilities. Fans believe that the Beatles left numerous cryptic clues about McCartney's passing in their albums as a way of confessing to the public without directly addressing the issue. Proponents of the theory pointed to an apparent wealth of evidence hidden in Beatles lyrics, album artwork, and promotional materials. The most prominent source of these clues is the Beatles' Abbey Road album cover, released in 1969, which supposedly contains numerous visual hints of McCartney's death. On the cover, McCartney is the only member of the band walking barefoot, and he is out of step with the other three band members. Conspiracy theorists interpreted this as a subtle symbol of death. Additionally, they claimed the procession of Lennon in white, Starr in black, and Harrison in denim represented a priest, undertaker, and gravedigger, respectively. The album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band also became a focus of intense scrutiny. The use of the name Billy Shears in the album was thought to be a direct acknowledgement of Paul's departure. Fans pointed to the cover's inclusion of a floral arrangement resembling a bass guitar and the presence of a hand hovering above McCartney's head. Additionally, fans claimed that if you play the final moments of Strawberry Fields Forever backward, John Lennon can be heard saying, "I buried Paul." On October 10, 1969, the band's press officer Derek Taylor issued a statement denying that McCartney had died, but this only seemed to stoke the flames of speculation. Meanwhile, McCartney's relative silence during this period added fuel to the fire. He had retreated to his farm in Scotland with his family, partly due to the stress of the Beatles' impending breakup, as well as the birth of his daughter, Mary. The theory gained such viral traction that by November 1969, McCartney was forced to come out of seclusion to address the rumors head-on. In an interview with Life magazine in that month, he advised that the rumors were stupid, and he was in seclusion because he had gone through 10 years of constant extreme fame. While Paul was initially miffed by the theory, he eventually came around and found the humor in it. In 1993, McCartney released a live album titled Paul is Live, mocking the theory's absurdity. The album's cover, which mimicked the Abbey Road image, featured McCartney walking his dog and standing out of step with the dog. However, there's another less well-known conspiracy theory related to the Paul is dead theory. Under this theory, the entire rumor was spread by someone with a financial interest in the Beatles. By starting such a rumor, everyone was talking about the Beatles constantly, driving even further record sales. The interdimensional alien hypothesis presents an alternative explanation to the widely accepted extraterrestrial hypothesis for the origin of unidentified flying objects. The IDH suggests that UFOs and their occupants may originate from parallel dimensions or realities that coexist with our own. This hypothesis has gained considerable attention and has been advocated by prominent ufologists like Jacques Vallée. Vallée, perhaps the most prominent advocate of this theory, argued that the behaviors associated with UFO sightings and alien abductions are inconsistent with visitors from distant planets. Vallée proposed that UFOs might represent a parallel universe coexisting with our own. He proposed that their appearance in our reality could involve manipulation of space and time in ways that our current science cannot fully understand. John Keel, another ufologist, further expanded on the idea of non-human entities interacting with humanity through his ultra-terrestrial theory. Keel argued that many paranormal events, ranging from sightings of strange creatures to UFO encounters, could be explained by entities that have the ability to shift between dimensions. His theory tied them to traditional supernatural beings like ghosts, fairies, angels, and demons, as well as famously to cryptids like the Mothman. The scientific basis for the interdimensional hypothesis draws on theoretical physics, particularly ideas related to quantum mechanics and the multiverse theory. Physicists have long speculated about the possibility of multiple dimensions beyond the familiar three-dimensional space and one-dimensional time. String theory, for instance, suggests the existence of additional spatial dimensions, while the concept of a multiverse proposes that our universe could be just one of many coexisting realities. Proponents of the IDH argue that UFOs might be manifestations of beings or vehicles from these alternate dimensions, appearing in our reality due to fluctuations or overlaps between universes. One of the most intriguing aspects of the IDH is its ability to explain the seemingly bizarre and non physical behaviors often associated with UFOs. For example, many UFO sightings involve objects that appear to defy the laws of physics, moving at incredible speeds, making sharp turns, or vanishing abruptly. These anomalies could be explained if the objects were not bound by the same physical laws as our universe, suggesting they might originate from a reality where different laws of physics apply. The IDH also offers a compelling explanation for the long history of strange phenomena that predates modern UFO sightings. From ancient myths of gods descending from the heavens to medieval reports of strange aerial phenomena like in Nuremberg in 1561, these events were rare but widespread. Vallée and other IDH proponents argue that these accounts could represent early interactions with interdimensional beings, who appeared in forms that were comprehensible to those people. In modern times, the IDH has gained traction as a way to interpret the wide variety of experiences reported by UFO witnesses. Another notable advocate of the IDH is David Grush, a former U.S. intelligence officer. He has claimed that the U.S. government has evidence of advanced technology that could be interdimensional in origin.